All right, today we're going to tackle two big words that are absolutely key to understanding our modern world: colonialism and postcolonialism. Now I know they might sound like dusty old history terms, but as you're about to see, their story is really far from over.
So when you hear the word colonialism, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's all about the past, right? We picture old maps of European empires, flags being raised and lowered over faraway lands, a chapter of history that feels pretty firmly closed.
But here's a thought. What if colonialism wasn't just a historical event? What if it was more like an operating system? One that's still quietly running in the background, influencing our economies, our politics, and even the way we think about the world. That's the core question we're digging into today. Okay, so before we can really see its influence now, we have to get super clear on what colonialism actually was. And believe me, it was so much more than just redrawing some maps. It was about fundamentally rewiring entire societies. Now, on the surface, the textbook definition is pretty straightforward. It's the practice of domination, one power controlling another territory and its people. You know, think of Britain in India or Spain in the Americas. Seems simple enough. But this is where it gets a lot deeper than the textbook. See, colonialism wasn't just about political or military control. It was a total system. It reached into every single part of life, controlling who worked and where resources went, deciding which languages were important and whose history got told, and maybe most powerfully, it shaped how people came to understand their own identity. And to really get that last point, we need a key term. It sounds a little academic, I know, but stick with me. The word is epistemic. All it means is related to knowledge. It's about how we know what we think we know. And this right here, this reveals a core strategy of colonial power. It wasn't just held in place by soldiers and guns. It was justified by ideas, by producing knowledge, books, studies, reports that painted colonized people as somehow backward or uncivilized. The whole project of foreign rule could be presented as a natural, logical, and even a necessary thing for progress.
So, all that brings us to our second big term, and honestly, to the biggest misconception of all. What on earth does the post in postcolonialism actually mean?
Okay, and this is the crucial point. If you remember just one thing from this whole explainer, make it this. The post in postcolonialism does not simply mean after. It doesn't mean colonialism is over and we've all just moved on. Nope, it is way, way more complicated than that.
Instead, think of postcolonialism as the study of the afterlife of empire. It's about looking at all the shadows and echoes and fingerprints that colonial power left behind long after the official flags came down.
So, a much better way to think about it is this. Postcolonialism is the critical study of everything that comes in the wake of formal independence. It's all about investigating the ways colonial structures and ideas are still very much at work in our world.
Postcolonialism is what pushes us to ask the really hard questions. Like, why do so many conflicts today trace their roots right back to borders that were just drawn on a map by colonial powers 100 years ago, with basically zero regard for the actual people who lived there?
And it asks this: why do we still see economic patterns that were set up ages ago, where all the resources flowed from the colony back to the empire, still creating huge global inequality and dependency today?
And to bring it back to that idea of knowledge, it asks why theories and philosophies and scientific models that were developed in Europe or North America are so often treated as the default, as the universal standard for literally the entire rest of the world.
Now, this whole way of seeing the world didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was built by some really foundational thinkers who started to connect the dots between that colonial past and the so-called post-colonial present. Two names you absolutely have to know are Frantz Fanon and Edward Said. Fanon, who was a psychiatrist, explored the deep psychological wounds that colonialism leaves behind. And Said's incredible work, Orientalism, showed how Western experts basically invented a simplified, biased, and often totally fictional version of the East to make it seem inferior and, well, easier to control. And that gets to the heart of their shared insight. Knowledge is not neutral. It's not always innocent. How you describe a place or a people is a huge form of power. I mean, if you define a group as uncivilized, you've already handed yourself a justification for civilizing them, often by force.
Okay, so I know this might all be sounding a bit like history or some abstract theory, but putting on a post-colonial lens actually helps us understand some very real, very current issues that are happening right now. It gives us the tools to see these legacies everywhere. We see it in the huge debates over whether museums should return artifacts to the countries they were taken from. We see it in the stubborn patterns of global wealth and poverty. We even see it in modern migration debates about who gets called an outsider, especially when their homelands were once occupied by the very nations they're trying to enter. The language of empire is still all around us.
So let's just put it all together side by side. Colonialism, that was the historical system, the direct rule and conquest. Postcolonialism, that's the modern critique, the study of the lasting effects. Colonialism was about occupying the land. Postcolonialism is about the lingering power that's baked into borders, economies, and ideas long after the occupiers have technically left.
And that leaves us with this final, really powerful idea. Just because an empire ends, that doesn't mean the power structures it created just vanish. Post-colonial thought really insists that decolonization isn't just a single event that happened in the past. It's an ongoing, active process of challenging those lingering systems. And when you think about it that way, well, that completely reframes how you see the world today.